The train whistle shrieked across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory in 1875, jolting Virginia Keller awake from her fitful sleep. Her knuckles had turned white from gripping the small leather-bound journal in her lap, the only possession she'd brought that held any real meaning. Everything else she owned was packed in the trunk beneath her feet, a meager collection representing 22 years of life in Philadelphia, now traded for an uncertain future in the West. Virginia tucked a stray auburn curl behind her ear and stared out the window as Cheyenne came into view. The town looked nothing like the idyllic painting included in her correspondence with Mr. Reginald Decker, the man she was traveling to marry. The streets were muddy, lined with saloons and businesses that appeared hastily constructed, as if the entire town might blow away in the next strong wind. "First time out west, miss." The elderly woman seated across from her offered a sympathetic smile. Virginia nodded. "I'm to be married, a mail-order arrangement. Brave girl. Who's the lucky fellow?" "Mr. Reginald Decker. He owns a cattle ranch outside of town." The woman's smile faltered. "Decker's place? Oh my." Virginia's stomach tightened. "You know of him." "Passing through is all," the woman replied, suddenly interested in her knitting. "I'm sure it will work out fine, dear." The train lurched to a stop, and Virginia gathered her belongings with trembling hands. The platform was crowded with travelers, merchants, and cowboys, their boots kicking up dust that caught in her throat. She clutched her trunk handle, suddenly feeling very small and very alone. A booming voice cut through the noise. "Miss Keller." The crowd parted to reveal a tall man with a shock of gray hair and a thick mustache. His expensive suit and gold watch chain marked him as a man of means, but there was something in his eyes that made Virginia's skin crawl. This was Reginald Decker, 25 years her senior, just as his letters had described. "Mr. Decker," she said with a curtsy, trying to hide her discomfort, "let me look at you." His gaze traveled down her body with such blatant assessment that she felt the need to cover herself despite being fully clothed. "You'll do. Come along. I've business in town before we head to the ranch." He snapped his fingers at a young boy who rushed forward to take Virginia's trunk. Without another word, Decker turned and strode away, clearly expecting her to follow. The town's main street was a chaotic blend of commerce and vice. Virginia hurried to keep up with Decker's long strides, dodging cowboys, merchants, and ladies of questionable virtue. They stopped in front of a saloon called the Golden Spur. "Wait here," Decker ordered. "I've business inside that's not fit for a lady's ears." Virginia stood awkwardly on the boardwalk, clutching her reticule as passers-by cast curious glances her way. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she wished she'd worn her lighter dress despite the modesty it sacrificed. "Madam, you might want to step into the shade." The voice was deep and gentle, with a slight drawl that identified its owner as a Texan. She turned to find herself looking up at a tall cowboy with kind blue eyes. His face was tanned from the sun, with laugh lines around his eyes despite his apparent youth. He couldn't have been more than 26 or 27. He tipped his hat politely, revealing dark blonde hair. "Thank you, but I'm waiting for my—" Virginia hesitated. "My fiancé." "In there," the cowboy nodded toward the saloon. "The Golden Spur isn't known for its respectable clientele. You new to Cheyenne?" "Just arrived. I'm Virginia Keller." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Keller. I'm Bryce Norwood." He offered a calloused hand, which she took after a moment's hesitation. His grip was firm but gentle. "If you don't mind my asking, who's the lucky man?" "Mr. Reginald Decker." Bryce's expression darkened instantly. "Decker, you're engaged to Reg Decker." Virginia's heart sank. "You know him." "Everyone knows Decker." Bryce glanced toward the saloon, then back at her. "Miss Keller, I don't mean to alarm you, but the saloon doors banged open and Decker emerged with two rough-looking men. His face flushed with anger when he spotted Virginia talking with Bryce. "Norwood," he spat. "What business do you have with my fiancé?" "Just being neighborly, Decker," Bryce said evenly, though Virginia noticed how his stance changed, becoming more alert, one hand casually resting near the pistol on his hip. "Keep away from what's mine." Decker grabbed Virginia's arm roughly. "Come along." Virginia winced at his grip but allowed herself to be pulled away. She glanced back to see Bryce watching them, concern evident in his expression. Decker practically dragged her to a waiting carriage. I see you've met the Norwood boy. Stay away from him and his kind. That family's been a thorn in my side for years. He was merely being polite, Virginia protested. Decker's grip tightened painfully. You'll learn quickly, Miss Keller, that I don't tolerate my property interacting with my enemies. Property? Virginia's voice was barely a whisper. What else would you call it? I paid for your passage. I'm providing you with a home, security. In exchange, you'll be my wife, tend my house, and bear my children. A simple transaction. His tone left no room for argument. The carriage ride to Decker's ranch was silent and tense. Virginia stared out the window at the vast landscape, fighting back tears. The rolling hills and distant mountains were beautiful, but they now seemed like prison walls closing in around her. Decker's ranch was impressive, a large main house with several outbuildings, corrals filled with cattle and horses, and bunkhouses for the ranch hands. But as Virginia was led inside, she noticed how barren the house felt. Expensive furniture filled the rooms, but there were no personal touches, no sense that this was a home rather than simply a place to sleep. Martha will show you to your room, Decker said, gesturing to a stern-faced housekeeper. The wedding will be Saturday. That gives you 3 days to prepare. I expect you to look your best. So soon, Virginia's voice trembled. I didn't bring you all this way to court you, Miss Keller. I need a wife, not a sweetheart. With that, he turned and left her standing in the foyer. Martha led her upstairs to a small but well-appointed bedroom. Dinner is at 6 sharp. Mr. Decker doesn't tolerate tardiness. Left alone, Virginia finally allowed her tears to fall. This was nothing like she had imagined. Decker's letters had been formal but kind, describing a life of comfort and respect. The reality was so different she was to be nothing more than another possession. She unpacked her few belongings, carefully placing her mother's silver hairbrush on the vanity. Her parents had died in a fever epidemic 3 years earlier, leaving her with no family and few options. When the advertisement for mail-order brides had appeared in the newspaper, it had seemed like providence. Dinner that night was a silent affair. Decker spoke only to issue corrections about her posture or to remind her of her duties once they were married. 2 ranch hands joined them, brothers named Thomas and Henry, who managed the day-to-day operations of the ranch. They barely acknowledged Virginia, speaking only to Decker about cattle prices and water rights. The Norwoods are diverting water from the creek again, Thomas reported. Claiming it's their right since the stream crosses their property first. Thieving bastards, Decker muttered. They've been trying to run me off this land for years. First old man Norwood, now his son thinks he can continue the feud. Virginia's ears perked up at the mention of Bryce. What's the nature of your disagreement with the Norwoods? She asked before she could stop herself. Decker's fork clattered against his plate. The nature, Miss Keller, is that they're liars and cheats, and you'll not speak of them in my house again. Is that clear? Yes, Mr. Decker. Virginia lowered her gaze to her barely touched food. That night, she couldn't sleep. The unfamiliar sounds of the ranch cattle lowing in the distance, the creak of the house settling, the howl of coyotes kept her awake. But more than that, the growing dread in her stomach made rest impossible. She had traded one desperate situation for another, possibly worse one. The next morning, Virginia asked Martha if she might ride into town to purchase fabric for a wedding dress. Mr. Decker left instructions that you're not to leave the ranch without him, Martha said flatly. But surely I can't be expected to remain indoors for 3 days, Virginia protested. You can walk the grounds, but not beyond the fence line. Mr. Decker's orders. Martha's expression softened slightly. It's for your own safety, miss. This ain't Philadelphia. Virginia spent the day exploring the immediate grounds of the ranch house, careful to stay within the boundaries Decker had set. The more she saw, the more she noticed how the ranch hands seemed to avoid eye contact with her, how they worked with grim determination rather than the camaraderie she'd expected. In the afternoon, she found herself near the stables, drawn by the beautiful horses in the corral. A young stable boy was exercising a magnificent palomino. She's beautiful, Virginia said, approaching the fence. The boy, no more than 15, nodded shyly. This here's Goldie, fastest horse on the ranch. Might I pet her? The boy looked nervous but led the horse closer. Virginia reached out to stroke the mare's velvety nose. "You the new missus?" the boy asked. "Soon to be," Virginia replied, unable to keep the hesitation from her voice. "You don't seem very happy about it." Virginia was startled by his directness. "I'm adjusting." "Mr. Decker ain't an easy man to please." The boy glanced around to make sure they weren't overheard. "The last lady who came to be his wife left after 2 weeks, walked 15 miles to town in the middle of the night, they say." Virginia's blood ran cold. "What happened to her?" The boy shrugged. "Don't rightly know. Mr. Decker said she couldn't handle frontier life, went back east." "Billy," a sharp voice called from the stable. An older ranch hand emerged, his expression severe. "Get that horse back in training." "And you, miss, Mr. Decker wouldn't take kindly to you distracting the hands from their work." Virginia retreated to the house, the boy's words echoing in her mind. That night at dinner, Decker informed her that he'd arranged for the minister to come to the ranch for the ceremony. "I thought we might be married in town," Virginia said carefully. "It would be nice to have some of the townspeople present." "This isn't a social occasion," Decker replied. "It's a practical matter. The fewer people involved, the better." The second day passed much like the first. Virginia felt increasingly like a prisoner, watched constantly by Martha or one of the ranch hands. She wondered if they were under orders to keep her from fleeing as the previous bride apparently had. On the morning of her wedding day, Virginia woke with a sense of desperation. She'd spent the night considering her options and found them woefully limited. She had no money of her own, no one to turn to for help, and nowhere to go even if she could escape the ranch. Martha helped her dress in her best gown, a pale blue silk that had belonged to her mother. As she pinned Virginia's hair up, Martha's usually stern expression softened. "You're a pretty thing," the housekeeper said. "Too pretty for this place, maybe." "Martha," Virginia said quietly, meeting the woman's eyes in the mirror, "the girl who was here before me, what really happened to her?" Martha's hands stilled. "Best not to ask questions about things that don't concern you, miss." "But it does concern me. I'm about to marry a man I barely know, and I have reason to believe he may not be the person he presented himself as in his letters." Martha resumed her work with the hairpins, her movements more hurried now. "Mr. Decker is a powerful man in these parts. He gets what he wants one way or another." "Did he hurt her?" "The other bride," Martha stepped back. "I've said too much already. The minister will be here at noon." "I'll come fetch you when it's time." Left alone, Virginia paced her room like a caged animal. Through her window, she could see ranch hands preparing for the small ceremony, setting up chairs in the garden. Decker was outside directing everything, his commanding presence evident even from a distance. A commotion at the front of the property drew her attention. A rider approached at a gallop, and even from her window, Virginia recognized Bryce Norwood. Her heart leaped unexpectedly. Decker and his men moved to intercept Bryce, hands hovering near their guns. Virginia couldn't hear what was being said, but the tension was palpable even from a distance. After a heated exchange, Bryce turned his horse and rode away, but not before looking up at the house. For a moment, Virginia thought he might have seen her at the window. When Martha came to fetch her at noon, Virginia was sitting on the edge of her bed, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "It's time, miss," Martha said. "Martha, please, is there no way out of this?" "I fear I've made a terrible mistake coming here." The housekeeper hesitated, glancing toward the door. "Listen to me quickly. The north pasture gate is unlocked. If someone were to take a horse from the small paddock behind the smokehouse, no one would notice until morning." She pressed a small bundle into Virginia's hands. "Food, not much, but enough for a day." Hope flared in Virginia's chest. "Why are you helping me? No woman deserves what happened to the last one. Now come along before they get suspicious." Virginia followed Martha downstairs, her mind racing. Escape tonight was possible, but where would she go? Cheyenne was 15 miles away, according to what she'd overheard. Could she make it alone? The small gathering in the garden consisted only of Decker, a few of his most trusted hands, and a nervous-looking minister. Virginia took her place beside Decker, who gripped her elbow possessively. "You look acceptable," he whispered, his breath hot against her ear. The minister began the ceremony, his voice shaking slightly. Virginia stood in a daze, barely hearing the words. When the time came for her to speak her vows, she opened her mouth but found herself unable to form the words. Miss Keller, the minister prompted gently. I. Virginia looked up at Decker at his cold eyes and impatient expression. I cannot. Decker's fingers dug into her arm. You will say the words, he hissed. I will not. She tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. You signed a contract, Miss Keller. You accepted my terms. I accepted the terms of a gentleman who promised respect and partnership, Virginia said, finding courage in her desperation. Not a man who views me as property to be acquired. Decker's face contorted with fury. He raised his hand as if to strike her, causing the minister to gasp and step back. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Decker. Virginia turned to see Bryce Norwood standing at the edge of the garden, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. Behind him were several men, all armed. This doesn't concern you, Norwood, Decker snarled. When you threaten a lady, it becomes my concern. Bryce's voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. Miss Keller has declined your proposal. As a gentleman, you should accept her decision. Decker's men had drawn their weapons now, creating a tense standoff. You're trespassing on my property, Decker said. I could have you shot. And start a war you can't win, Bryce shook his head. Sheriff Thompson is right behind us, along with half the town. Seems folks were mighty interested when I mentioned you were forcing another bride to marry you against her will, especially after what happened to Miss Evans last spring. Virginia gasped. What happened to her? Nothing that will happen to you, Bryce promised, his eyes meeting hers. Miss Keller, if you wish to leave, you may do so now. No one will stop you. Virginia didn't hesitate. She pulled free from Decker's slackened grip and moved quickly toward Bryce. Decker's face purpled with rage. She's mine. I paid good money to bring her here. She's a woman, not a heifer at auction, Bryce replied evenly, and she's leaving with me. Not while I breathe, Decker snarled, reaching for his gun. Don't, warned a new voice. An older man in a sheriff's badge stepped into view. Don't make this worse for yourself, Reginald. Decker's hand froze inches from his holster. His eyes darted between the sheriff, Bryce, and Virginia, calculating his odds. Finally, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Get off my land, he muttered. All of you? Bryce gently guided Virginia away. Can you ride? He asked softly. She nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. The warmth of his chest against her back was reassuring in a way she couldn't articulate. As they rode away from Decker's ranch, followed by the sheriff and the others, Virginia finally found her voice. How did you know? When I met you in town, I saw the fear in your eyes. Then when I heard Decker had scheduled the wedding so quickly, I remembered what happened to Lillian Evans. Bryce's voice was grim. She wasn't the first bride Decker mistreated, but the others were too frightened to speak against him. Lillian was brave enough to escape, but she was damaged by what he did to her. Virginia shuddered. He would have hurt me too. Yes, but you're safe now. They rode into Cheyenne as the sun was setting. Bryce took her to a modest hotel run by a kindly widow named Mrs. Foster, who clucked sympathetically when she heard Virginia's story. You can stay as long as you need, dear, Mrs. Foster assured her. We take care of our own in Cheyenne. That evening, after Virginia had bathed and changed into clothes borrowed from Mrs. Foster's daughter, Bryce called on her in the hotel's small parlor. How are you feeling? He asked, genuine concern in his eyes. Relieved, foolish, afraid. Virginia gave a weak smile, all at once. You've nothing to be ashamed of. Many women answer these advertisements hoping for a better life. And now I'm stranded with no money and no prospects. She tried to keep the despair from her voice. Not stranded, Bryce corrected gently. Mrs. Foster has offered you a position helping at the hotel if you wish to stay in Cheyenne. Or if you prefer to return east, I'd be happy to provide funds for your journey. Virginia studied him, this man who had risked his life for a woman he barely knew. Why did you help me, truly? Bryce considered the question. Because it was right, and because from the moment I saw you standing alone outside that saloon, something told me you were someone worth knowing. A blush warmed Virginia's cheeks. Thank you doesn't seem adequate. Your safety is thanks enough. He rose to leave. Rest now. Tomorrow will be soon enough to decide your next steps. Over the following weeks, Virginia found her place in Cheyenne. She worked at Mrs. Foster's hotel, quickly becoming indispensable with her organizational skills and warm manner with guests. News spread of Decker's thwarted wedding. And other stories emerged of ranch hands who'd been cheated out of wages, of neighboring ranchers pressured to sell their land through intimidation, and most disturbingly, of two other mail-order brides before Lillian Evans who had simply disappeared. The sheriff investigated these claims but found nothing concrete enough to arrest Decker. The man remained on his ranch, his power diminished but not eliminated. Bryce called on Virginia regularly. At first, they spoke of practical matters, her adjustment to Cheyenne, opportunities for employment beyond the hotel, but soon their conversations deepened. She learned of his family's ranch, smaller than Decker's but well-managed, of his dreams to expand their breeding program for horses rather than cattle, and of the water rights dispute that had fueled the feud with Decker for years. My father believed that water should be shared equitably among all the ranches it passes through, Bryce explained during a Sunday afternoon walk. Decker believes the man with the most money and guns should control it all. Virginia found herself drawn to Bryce's sense of justice and his gentle strength. Unlike Decker, who demanded respect through fear, Bryce earned it through his actions and character. One evening in late summer, nearly 3 months after her arrival in Cheyenne, Bryce invited Virginia to dinner at a small restaurant that had recently opened. "You look beautiful," he said when he arrived to escort her, his eyes appreciative but respectful as he took in her simple blue dress. "Thank you." Virginia felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with nervousness. "You're quite handsome yourself." Dinner was pleasant, their conversation flowing easily as always. As they finished their dessert, Bryce grew uncharacteristically quiet. "Is something wrong?" Virginia asked. "Nothing wrong." He took a deep breath. "Virginia, these past months getting to know you have been the happiest of my life. You're the strongest, kindest woman I've ever met." Virginia's heart began to race. "Bryce, I'm not asking for any commitments. I know your experience with Decker has made you cautious about men's intentions, as it should, but I wanted you to know that my feelings for you have grown into something I never expected." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I'm in love with you, Virginia Keller." Tears welled in Virginia's eyes. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself, but I love you too. Would you consider courting properly? No rushed weddings, no contracts or obligations, just two people seeing where their hearts lead them." Virginia squeezed his hand. "I would like that very much." Their courtship progressed sweetly over the next few months. Bryce introduced Virginia to his mother, a warm-hearted woman who welcomed her without reservation, and to the Norwood Ranch with its green pastures and clear running streams so different from the oppressive atmosphere of Decker's property. Winter came to Wyoming, bringing snow and bitter cold. Virginia continued working at the hotel, now as the assistant manager, having proven her worth many times over. She'd made friends in Cheyenne, built a life for herself far different from what she'd imagined when stepping off that train. One snowy December evening, a commotion in the hotel lobby drew Virginia from her office. A trail hand, half frozen and exhausted, had staggered in with alarming news. "Decker's planning to dam the creek tonight," the young man gasped. "Cut off the Norwood place completely. He's got dynamite and a dozen men." Virginia's blood ran cold. "Where's Bryce?" "At the ranch. Decker's men delayed me, hoping I wouldn't get word to town in time." Virginia didn't hesitate. She sent the hotel's stable boy to alert the sheriff, then borrowed Mrs. Foster's horse and rode out into the gathering storm. The bitter wind cut through her coat, but fear for Bryce drove her forward. The journey to the Norwood Ranch normally took an hour on horseback. Fighting through the snowdrifts, it took Virginia nearly 2. As she approached the property, she heard shouting and what sounded like gunfire. Heart pounding, she urged her horse toward the creek that marked the boundary between the Norwood and Decker ranches. Through the swirling snow, she could make out dark figures struggling near the water's edge. "Bryce," she called out, dismounting and stumbling forward. A figure detached from the melee and rushed toward her. It was Bryce, his face bloodied but his eyes alert. "Virginia, what are you doing here? It's not safe." He grabbed her arms. The ranch hand made it to town. "He said Decker was planning to dam the creek." He tried. "We caught them setting charges." Bryce glanced back toward the creek, where several of his hands were restraining Decker's men. "It got ugly." "Where's Decker?" Bryce's expression darkened. "Ran when the tide turned against him. But he won't get far in this storm." As if summoned by his name, a shadowy figure emerged from the blowing snow, pistol raised. "Well, isn't this touching?" Decker sneered. "The thief and the whore together at last." "That's enough, Decker," Bryce said calmly, pushing Virginia behind him. "The sheriff's on his way. This ends tonight." "It does indeed." Decker's finger tightened on the trigger. Virginia acted without thinking, shoving Bryce aside as Decker fired. The bullet whistled past, missing them both. Before Decker could fire again, Bryce had drawn his own weapon. "Drop it," Bryce commanded. "I don't want to shoot you, but I will." For a moment, it seemed Decker might comply. Then, with a cry of rage, he lunged forward, aiming not at Bryce but at Virginia. A single shot rang out. Decker stumbled, a look of surprise crossing his face before he collapsed face first into the snow. Virginia stood frozen, staring at the fallen man. Bryce quickly checked for signs of life, then shook his head grimly. "Are you all right?" he asked, turning to Virginia. She nodded, shaking. "I never wanted anyone to die, nor did I." Bryce holstered his gun, "but he gave me no choice. Not while I breathe would I let him hurt you." By the time the sheriff arrived with a posse from town, the storm had abated somewhat. After taking statements from everyone present and examining the dynamite Decker's men had brought, he determined that Bryce had acted in self-defense. "Been a long time coming," the sheriff said privately to Virginia. "Decker's been terrorizing this county for years. Maybe now some of his victims will feel safe enough to come forward." In the following days, the true extent of Decker's crimes began to emerge. Bodies were found buried on his property, including those of 2 mail-order brides who had returned east. His financial records revealed years of fraud, extortion, and bribery reaching as far as the territorial governor's office. For Virginia, the revelations brought a mix of horror and relief. She had escaped a fate worse than she had imagined, thanks to Bryce's intervention and her own courage. Spring came to Wyoming, melting the snow and bringing new life to the range island. On a warm April evening, Bryce took Virginia riding to a hilltop overlooking both their properties, for she had inherited Decker's ranch through a quirk of Wyoming law that recognized her as his intended bride with rights to his estate, there being no other claimants. "What will you do with it?" Bryce asked as they sat on a blanket, watching the sunset paint the hills gold. "I've been thinking about that," Virginia replied. "I'd like to turn it into a haven for women like me, those who came west seeking a new life but found themselves in dangerous situations. A place where they can work, learn skills, and decide their own futures." Bryce smiled. "That's a wonderful idea, and I'd like your help," she added, "not just with the practical aspects, but—" She took a deep breath. "Bryce, these past months with you have shown me what real love looks like. Not ownership or control, but partnership and respect." "Virginia," Bryce took her hands. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that I love you and I'm ready for whatever comes next. Together." Bryce reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "Virginia Keller, will you marry me? Not as a mail-order bride, not as an obligation, but as my equal, my partner, and my love." Tears of joy spilled down Virginia's cheeks. "Yes, Bryce Norwood. With all my heart, yes." Their wedding in June was everything Virginia's almost wedding to Decker had not been joyful, well attended by the entire town and completely of her own choosing. As she walked down the aisle of Cheyenne's small church on the arm of Sheriff Thompson, who had offered to give her away, Virginia caught the eye of her soon-to-be husband. Bryce's smile was radiant with love and promise. This was no transaction, no cold contract between strangers. This was a union forged through courage, respect, and genuine affection. The haven for women opened that autumn on the former Decker ranch, with Virginia and Bryce splitting their time between it and the Norwood property. Over the years, dozens of women found refuge there, learning ranching skills, starting businesses in town, or simply healing before moving on to new lives. Virginia and Bryce's family grew with the addition of 2 daughters and a son, all raised to value justice, compassion, and the equality of all people regardless of gender or station. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Virginia would take out her old leather-bound journal and read the desperate entries she'd written on that train journey west. The frightened young woman who had traveled to marry a stranger seemed like someone from another lifetime. "Any regrets?" Bryce would ask, finding her with the journal open in her lap, and Virginia would close the book, smiling at the man who had stood between her and danger, the man who had shown her what real love meant. "Not a single one," she would reply, taking his hand and leading him to bed. "Not a single one,"